I live out in the middle of nowhere. I don't mean just out in the country a little. I mean out deep in the middle of the outback, where the ground is red and not a lot grows. There are two main seasons. The wet season, where there is a lot of rain, and the dry season, where everything is as dry as a bone. My town has a population of under 1,000 people. I think 800 or thereabouts, and some of the family trees resemble a wreath. Out here, you can actually see the night sky, without all the pollution from the cities. I love seeing the stars clear in the sky. Once or twice, I've even managed to see a shooting star. The main point I want to make is that it is isolated and hard to get to. The nearest towns are well over 4 hours away. It was a Sunday night and a long weekend, where I get to spend more time with my boyfriend, John, since he didn't have to go into work on Monday. I was sitting in front of the TV watching the footy with him, when I heard what sounded like roaring from the sky. We looked at each other, then ran toward the window, and saw a large rock followed by a flame falling behind. It was way too close to the town. Panicked, we turned to look at each other, and ran outside to the ute with Blue, our red cattle dog, following closely behind. We were being nosy, and wanted to find out what it was. We got in the ute, and started following it, when it crashed further up in front of us. Already flames burst out around it. We parked a little way to keep the vehicle safe, and used the fire extinguisher to put out the fire, to prevent any bushfires from starting. The fires fizzled out with smoke rising, and we coughed from the fumes, covering our mouths and noses. My boyfriend, John, told me to step away from it, and not breathe in any of the fumes. We took some photos of the scene with our old school camera, the kind you needed to have them developed in order to get the pictures. The front part was partially buried in the red earth. It was a narrow circular structure, with a large crack through the middle, and it slowly creaked open. Brown and maroon, liquid leaked out the bottom, spilling out everywhere. A sharp smell of death greeted us, and a 4-fingered hand reached out from the bottom. John put his arm across me to keep me from getting too close, as it slithered out and let out a slow, long whimper. Its legs were missing, the entrails spilled out, and black greasy pieces of flesh clung tightly while the legs finally followed. Both of us nearly vomited at the sight. It flailed in the dirt, screaming and trying to escape, before the figure finally fell limp, now dead. We looked inside to see if there were any survivors. They looked human, but not quite. Their necks were snapped or had other injuries, where it was clear they had died where they sat from the crash. There was a beeping from what I imagined was an emergency beacon, followed by a number of strange gurgling sounds. I imagined there was another of their kind, scared for them, listening in. The beeping and sounds finally stopped when the engine died. Their heads were elongated, their eyes taking up most of their skulls. Their skin was a pale green, and they didn't resemble the greys we see in the media. Their bodies were covered in a soot. I heard a faint crying from the inside, right at the back of the aircraft. There was a shadow moving from one side to another, before hiding behind some paneling. "Hey, I'm not gonna hurt you," I whispered. The hope it would understand me was rare. The hope of it understanding English was even rarer. I crawled inside with it. The smoke and the metal was hot. I could feel the intense heat from the crash. It stung my hands and knees as I crawled through. There were bright orange pieces of metal between myself and the smaller entity. It peeked out at me. The eyes glowed. I didn't care whether or not it could hurt me. I had to do something. I reached out with my hand, beckoning it to approach with my fingers, and it crept out. Taking my hand, and I pulled it out. There were strange repeating sounds getting louder, and I heard John from the outside call my name. I crawled out, pulled it close, and cradled it against my chest, stepping over the other deceased aliens, and ran to my boyfriend. We hurried over to the ute and drove away. I was so caught up in it, I couldn't feel how much pain my hands and knees were in. The spacecraft exploded loudly. The alien let out a scream, and we drove back to put out the fire. Whenever I tried to put the alien down, it would cling on tightly around my neck, and I watched John put out the additional fires. Already cars were approaching from the town. People were interested in finding out what was going on, and wanted to know for themselves. This was an event in such a quiet town. People got out of their cars and started chattering about what they saw. Already some of them had cameras and were taking pictures. Since they were the older style of cameras, it would take time before they were developed. However, some people brought Polaroids, where they would get it instantly. Some of the bogans were busy picking up pieces of the aircraft and putting it into their cars, probably to keep it or even sell it later. The police would likely be called, if they hadn't been already, but it would take them time to get out here. I was scared of what would happen to the alien in my arms. John gave me a confused look. Then his gaze moved to the small alien, and his face went white as a sheet. "Fuck," he murmured, unsure what to do. Red, our dog, came up wagging his tail, and so I played barking until he saw it in my arms. The bark instantly changed to a defensive one, then became incredibly aggressive, his fangs snapping repeatedly. And the only time he had ever behaved like this was when he saw a snake. "We have to take it home," I said. Together we went back to the ute, and John put Red in the back. He kept barking and wouldn't settle down. Normally, Red was quiet and friendly with anyone or anything. "I don't like this," John said. The windows uncharacteristically up, and I placed the alien on the floor, holding it with my legs. I didn't blame John for not liking it. Our sole car was the only one driving in the opposite direction. We had to smile and wave at nearly every car we drove past, until we reached our typical 3-bedroom fibro home. I kept the alien in my arms, while John put Red on a leash to prevent him from trying to nip at the alien. I really didn't think this through. I brought it inside and placed it on the couch. It looked so human. It didn't look like the stereotypical grey aliens you'd see on TV, and I wondered whether this was by design. It stared up at me, and I could have sworn it smiled, then heard the sound of people outside. It moved around frantically, and I had to sit beside it to try to hush it. It was so frightened. I cradled it in my arms. What did it eat? How would I treat it if it was injured? How would I keep it safe? Would other aliens someday come back for it? I heard the screen door open, and John came in through the back door. He sat across from me, stared at us both, and the reality of the situation began to sink in. The police or other government agencies would want it. That, or the Americans would try to take it to experiment on. It didn't deserve that. I looked over at him, sorry that John was now equally wrapped up in this. "We can't let them hurt it. It's just a baby." To be fair, I couldn't be sure, and I looked down at it. It reached down to touch my forearm. "How are we going to look after it?" he asked. I didn't know the answer. Outside, Red would occasionally bark, and it got louder until about 3 a.m, when one of the neighbors yelled at him to shut the fuck up, so he brought him inside. He never attacked the alien, and he stopped barking, but he never let it out of his sight, always staying in the room he was located in. Occasionally, he would whine and tilt his head to the side, ending up more curious than angry about the new visitor. Since we didn't have a crib or bed for it, plus we wanted to keep an eye on it, I made a makeshift bed out of old blankets and towels in my dresser, then placed it down, hoping none of it was toxic. It cooed up at me, and I wondered whether I was getting clucky over a damn alien. John and I went to sleep. I woke up, and the alien child was staring at me without blinking. Its mouth barely moved. Creepy. We started to get ready for the day. I cooked us some sausages and eggs for brekkie, idle chatting about what we were going to do that day, when we heard cars out the front. We looked through the blinds and curtain to see police cars going down the street. My small town didn't have a police station of its own. They only came for the rare, severe crimes. For the most part, the locals would sort things out themselves. We watched 2 officers walk toward the door. "John, take it out to the back shed, will you?" I asked. I could tell he didn't want to do it. And other than a few minor petty crimes in our youth, neither of us had been on the wrong side of the law before. I took a deep breath to try to calm my anxiety. I put a nightgown over my nightie and took a mouthful of my morning coffee. I tried to think of excuses I could say, pretending I wasn't waiting near the front door. Despite that, I startled when I heard the stern knock and opened it. The pair introduced themselves. As expected, they mentioned the crash and told me they knew we were there. We were seen at the landing site. It was strange to see multiple police cars when it was so rare to see them at all in the town. I nodded in agreement. Clearly they'd been to other houses already and heard the small town gossip. When they asked to come in, I wondered whether we had anything else that was incriminating, that could get us into trouble. I opened the door and let them in, offered them something to drink. They informed me that there had been people taking from the crash site, and they needed to analyze the contents to make sure it wasn't harmful to people or to animals. I told them we didn't take any of the scrap metal. We were first on the scene when it landed, and that my boyfriend and I put the fires out, both before and after it exploded. They suggested that the pair of us visit the school, where a medical tent had been put up to ensure the community had no health issues, just in case. One of them was staring closely at my red, burned knees, and instinctively, I pulled my nightie down to conceal them. Why would I need to go to the school? Neither of us is sick, I asked. They told me it was just to be safe. Everyone in the town was going there at some point today. This instantly made me suspicious. Not that I spoke up about it. I began, not wanting to sound crazy, and I considered my words carefully. Something that looked like a pilot coming out, and there were some others inside, too. The eldest looked me dead in the eyes. So far, they had been friendly. He told me, no, you didn't see anything out there, and that if I did, it was best for me to forget it. I don't like being told what to do, especially without a reason why. I certainly couldn't tell them about the surprise in the shed now, could I? John came in and shook their hands. He barely spoke, mind you. We all started smoking. Keep in mind, this was the 90s, and generally people smoked everywhere, especially at home. I sat and listened while they spoke. John had a weird way of getting people to tell him things without them realizing. They admitted that the authorities were worried, and were as in the dark as we were about what happened. That they weren't sure if it was some kind of aircraft or a weapon. They warned us that the army would be coming out here soon, if things kept getting bad. If things kept getting worse, the town may end up being quarantined to keep the wider community safe. I thought this was a load of shit, considering people rarely come out here anyway. Some tourists would pop in for a pit stop, on their way to the more exciting sites further north. Other than that, the only regulars to town were the shearers from the neighboring towns, and the roos who would jump through every now and then. They confessed they didn't know what it was, or where it had come from. Already the rumor mills were starting that this was a new aircraft by a foreign power, or one that was being tested by the Australian government. There had always been rumors about this sort of thing happening before. Bunch of wackos. Never believed a word of it. After a bit of a chat, the cops left, and John and I looked at each other, worried. We hugged each other, just holding on for a moment, and the pair of us walked out the back, past the rusty old Hills hoist, and to the shed. The alien child was right where he left it, this time joined by John's old childhood teddy bear, and I couldn't help but smile at him. He grumbled under his breath, and we walked toward it. This time it touched us, trying to hold on to us. I don't think it was injured in the crash. What do you think it eats? It doesn't look like a herbivore. I leaned down to look in its mouth. It didn't have any teeth, not the large molars typically found in herbivores, or the large fangs usually seen on carnivores. It couldn't communicate with us other than freaking out. I'm going to try to bring out different kinds of food. Hopefully it knows what it should or shouldn't eat. John, I pondered, hoping the old nosy sticky beak next door wouldn't try to find out what we were doing out here. You go inside and put on the telly. Sit there with your VB long neck like usual and just... I moved my hands, trying to think of the best way to put it. Act normal. Go! I gave him a gentle shove out the shed and stared at our alien child. I didn't want to be a parent, let alone a foster parent of a damn alien. What the fuck am I supposed to do with you little shit? I asked affectionately, and noticed Red was no longer in the backyard, where he was supposed to be. Red? Red! Come on! Where are you, boy? I called out. There was only one time before where he had escaped, and he just hung around the front yard, or just sat on the front step. I opened the side gate and checked out the front. He wasn't there either. This wasn't like him. Normally I'd barely have to call him before he would show up. Red! I called down the street, looking and using my hand to shield my eyes from the sunlight. And then up the street too. Nothing. I scratched my head in thought and went to ask my next door neighbors on either side. Neither of them had seen him. I went back inside to see John in his natural habitat, watching reruns of the footy. I didn't see Red with him. Hey, did you see Red when you came out here last? He shook his head but didn't look at me. He wasn't in the backyard. I think he must have gotten out somehow. Maybe he went to hang out with some of the local kids. I didn't think he was a fan of our visitor. Mind you, he settled down a lot. I think he's growing on him, but he was barking a lot at him last night. Normally, John would at least pretend to be listening to what I was saying when the TV was on. An occasional nod or a uh-huh would let me know he was paying attention. This time he didn't move or say anything. If he doesn't come back, we need to put up lost posters. Still, nothing. Oi! I said from the hallway, getting annoyed with him. Nothing. Oi, John, listen to me. I walked over and tapped his shoulder. His head was limp, and I tilted his chin up. He had a black substance dribbling from his lips, nose and eyes. It clung to him. He was barely breathing. John? John! I ran over to the cord phone. I wanted to hold him, but the cord phone wouldn't reach that far. I picked it up and carried it as far as it would go. I was just out of arm's reach. I dialed 000, the emergency line, and waited. I don't think it lasted long, but it felt like forever. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the tears down my cheeks. Hello? Yes, I need an ambulance. Hurry, please. I pleaded. The operator told me all the ambulances were out already. Outside I heard the sirens and peered out the window. There were a couple on the street, and this was even more unusual. It was always hard getting any support out here. I knew it had to be because of the alien crash. There was nothing else it could have been from. The lady on the line asked if we had been in touch with the UFO that landed. I didn't want to answer. I had to. Anything so John had a chance to live. Yes. Her tone changed. She told me help would arrive soon. The last ambulance drove away, crammed over capacity, and I wondered, when would John's arrive? He drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring to himself. In the chaos, I nearly forgot about the alien outside and wondered whether I should just hand it over. The poor thing would probably end up dissected in a lab somewhere. I nearly confessed the alien to her when she kept me on the line for some idle chit-chat. I hated the thought of it. There was a loud knock on the door, and as I was standing up, the door was kicked in. I screamed. Soldiers with rifles entered and pointed them at me, ordering me to step away and put my hands up. Not wanting to be shot, I did what they asked me to. None of them were locals. A man walked in. pointed a device at John's head, and then shook his head. "What's happening? Don't hurt him!" I screamed at them. I don't know exactly how they did it. John stopped moving, and then he was unceremoniously placed inside a black body bag. He was lifted up and taken outside. I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. They didn't leave right away. They had devices, and where they were sitting beeped louder. Then they aimed the device at me. The red light flashed violently, and I had a feeling it was to do with the alien. That man had no emotion. I mean, none. He came and lowered himself down to me. He didn't speak. He told me to tell them where it was, and I was too scared. He removed his sunnies or shades, and I got a chance to look into his eyes. They were completely black. I couldn't breathe when I stared into them. I felt myself becoming faint, and realized my hand was lifting in the direction of the backyard. I tried to pull it back, but I lost full control over it. A harsh, raspy voice loomed inside my mind. "Where is the alien?" It searched my mind. I tried to look away, but it maintained eye contact and held me firmly by the shoulders. I remembered arriving on the scene and seeing the dead bodies of the aliens, the harsh smell of the chemicals, and pulling the child from the wreckage, then taking it home. I hated how he could do this to me. I felt so violated. Finally, it broke, and the unknown man put his shades back on. "What the fuck are you?" I asked, half expecting him to hit me or something. But he stood, took out a chunky mobile phone, and called somebody. The 4 soldiers looked wary of him. They kept giving him concerned looks, and never stood comfortably next to him. After the call, there were sirens, and the soldiers themselves looked terrified. When they tried to leave, the man stopped them. He took a small flashlight out. It had a red and yellow flashing light. He held it at their foreheads, and they fell to the ground, dead, their bodies limp on the ground. Their eyes, nose, and ears all leaked blood all over the carpet. While he was distracted, I crept out and headed toward the back door. Once outside, I heard other people yelling and being forced out of their homes. No one was being killed, but this was unlike anything that has ever happened before. I went and hid inside the shed out back with a small alien. Maybe if I never picked it up, John would still be alive. I hid inside a locker and waited. There were sounds of screaming, even gunfire, and a loudspeaker moving through town, telling people to go to the designated areas immediately and not to delay. For people to leave their pets behind. I knew that would definitely cause a stir. Maybe those fucking bastards are the reason why Red disappeared. I tried to relax and did my best to stay as quiet as possible. I tried to keep my breathing slow. Occasionally, the alien made soft sounds of interest, but I ignored it. I was out there for hours, sweat dripping all over me from the damn heat, and when things quietened down, I opened the door to take a peek. I lingered at the partially open door. I didn't see or hear anything different, other than a random dog bark in the distance. I crept out. It was cold now. I wrapped my arms around my body and struggled to keep warm. I needed to get in the car and get away from here as quickly as possible. There was no way I'd survive in the bush by myself without supplies. It was too far to get to the nearest town on foot, and there was a chance the roads would have been blockaded. What was happening? I coughed and crept back toward the back door and peeked through the window. All the corpses had been removed, and from what I could see, there were no bloodstains either. It was as though a cleaning crew had come in and completely removed everything. But, hell, even John's VB was still in the same spot, as though he would come home at any time and drink it. I felt faint and realized I hadn't eaten for the better part of the day. I went to the kitchen and opened up the fridge. None of the power had been cut. I pulled out some lunch meat, nibbled on it, and took something to drink. I made sure I stayed away from the windows to prevent me from being spotted. A sharp sudden pain gripped my stomach. My bones themselves suddenly throbbed, and my joints felt like they were being twisted. I made my way to the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I couldn't call a doctor or try to go to the hospital. I'd have to get the flying doctors called out to come get me in usual circumstances. My skin was inflamed, red and swollen. I hadn't been bitten by anything, and I hadn't used any products that could potentially cause this. It really hurt. I heard movement from the outside, and 2 soldiers wearing gas masks were creeping around to peer inside the windows. Why were they wearing gas masks? One of them saw and called out to me, telling me they weren't going to hurt me. Just stop and listen to them. I wanted to, but not after what I had seen. The door was left unlocked, and they made their way inside. I was too exhausted to try to escape. I couldn't let them take me. I crawled along the floor, dragging my body forward by my fingertips, and it didn't take them long to catch up with me. One lowered himself down in front of me, while the other rested her hand on my shoulder and supported me. I expected to be pulled sharply. "Hey," a muffled feminine voice greeted me. "You're okay. We need to get you to the others. The crash released a pathogen. You're infected. You'll be okay." I tried to tell her to get away, to leave me alone, and that I didn't want to die. Helpless, the pair carried me outside to the car waiting. The streets outside were completely deserted. No one coming home from work, kids playing on the street, people walking their dogs, or neighbors chatting in the distance. It was unsettling. I didn't look at them. One of them drove and the other sat in the car with me until we reached the local schools. The oval between the high and the primary schools had an encampment. It was surrounded by military cars, tents, and I saw more members of the armed forces there. All of them were wearing protective suits and gas masks. I also noticed the distinct symbol of the Red Cross. I looked down at my arms. Smaller blisters started to poke through the skin now, and I wondered what was happening. "We found her. She is the last one." I heard that voice again on the radio. We went through the gates of a hastily added checkpoint. "What's going on?" I asked, as we moved through one of the tents. It was loud now. I could hear people chatting, coughing, wheezing, and I have never in my life seen so many sick people in one place. All of them had symptoms similar to mine, and some were able to stand and could assist the others while some were laying down in bed, barely clinging to life. Neither of them answered me. From what I guessed, the ones in the middle were the people who were being processed or assessed to see how severe their symptoms were. The ones sent to the primary school or kindergarten, etc., were the ones deemed likely to recover with treatment. The ones sent to the high school were to be quarantined, thought likely to die, and kept away from the rest. Someone who I'm guessing was a doctor approached, stared down at me and murmured with the soldiers. They bickered over my symptoms, and completely shut up when a man in a suit, without a gas mask or any protective gear, walked past. His eyes were still concealed, and there was no emotion on his face. Why were they so afraid of him? "Who is he?" I whispered. I didn't expect an answer, and nor did I receive one. They carried me. Any movement hurt, and I was taken inside the high school. I could hear screaming and people begging to be let out. Even in here there were different areas. There were ones who might survive, and they were still being treated and cared for, and the ones who were too far gone. They were given painkillers and simply left to die. They were kept in one of the classrooms, 2 weak and monitored with video cameras, and with people holding clipboards, writing down notes what was happening when they died, treating innocent people like they were experiments. And, worst of all, they weren't even bothering to hide it from the other patients here. I was led inside one of the nearby rooms. An identification tag was put around my wrist and my ankle. "What happened? Why are we sick?" I asked again, my hand on her arm. The same soldier looked down, her brown eyes soft and out of place behind the gas mask. After a little while, she told me. Perhaps she thought I was going to die anyway, so it wouldn't matter. The aircraft brought with it a pathogen. Humans have never seen an illness like this, We're trying to prevent it from spreading. She paused, looked over her shoulder, until another nurse walked past to administer something to another patient. We don't know if they did it on purpose or if it was innocent, but there was also poison inside the aircraft. We don't know if it was fuel or a weapon. The worst ones were the ones who went inside the aircraft and took pieces home with them. They brought the poison inside their homes. Entire families got wiped out. These weren't random families for me. These were members of my close-knit community. She gave me an apologetic look. Who are the men in suits? Why don't they need to wear a mask? I can't tell you. We were told they have clearance. Do what they say, and don't get in their way. I regretted bringing the baby alien home, even if they were releasing a weapon. Why would they bring a child with them? It didn't make any sense. I don't know how long I was there for. Over time, people either recovered from the pathogen or transferred to the primary school, and the unfortunate ones. They were put in body bags and taken out. They were first incinerated and buried in the outback somewhere. I vaguely remember the general direction, but the exact location is lost to me. Finally, even those within the primary school were permitted to go home. And for nearly a year later, the army remained in place. Most of them were good people, and were as uncomfortable being in this situation too, and even some relationships came out of it. People were given compensation to go and start new lives, and were told not to repeat what happened here. A couple of people threatened to go public with it, and they were the ones who disappeared. You could say that people were scared, and most of the population of the town didn't need to be encouraged to leave for good. They left, abandoning the town. For those that chose to stay, the facility slowly left. No post office, no more schools, no more hospitals, no more doctors, no more town mayor. This killed the defiance many families had, and they too left. A group, including myself, were determined to remain, and the government permitted us to stay. Eventually, all modern maps no longer had the town listed on it. You might be able to find it on Google Maps though, if you look close enough. Clearly, they didn't want anyone coming by to see what happened. The excuse given was there was a chemical leak that caused people to become sick. I was one of the few who developed an immunity to the pathogen. However, it was recommended that I stay out here and minimize my contact with other people. I've never found out the true reason why. All I care about is keeping my life close to what it used to be. My arms are riddled with the scars from the blisters, and they ache sometimes when there are strange lights in the sky. The scars on my knees and hands are also still there. I'm in my 50s now, never married and no kids. The other residents, the oldies, have all passed away now, and I live in a ghost town, completely by myself. It is hard keeping the place looking nice, but I get a lot of space to myself. I manage to drive out to get supplies, or on occasion, I get an airdrop of food, medicine and other things. The army or other government officials would ask if I saw the alien or had any new symptoms. I tell them no new symptoms, and the alien has never returned. They still drop by, bringing me treats and having a cuppa to talk about their lives in the big cities they're from. They'd asked me to take them where the spacecraft landed. They left nothing but a massive pit, and they had made sure they picked up every trace of it. You know, they never found the alien. When I went home, I found it was gone from the shed. A petrol canister, terps, and other chemicals were all completely gone. I don't know if it was a food source or medicine for it. It was years before I saw it again, and all prior evidence of any photography had also been seized. I see it striding through the outback. It keeps its distance from me, refusing to come into the town. A couple of times, it lifted its hand to say hello, and I waved back. I don't know if the alien was keeping people away or isolating itself. I forgave the poor little thing. Both of us are now out here, all alone, except for the odd urban explorer who tries to come out all this way. Sometimes they will bring me treats, and I'll give them the heavily scripted version of the events. Some of them don't believe me, telling me they knew the true story and would try to decipher whether or not I was lying. I tell them people love a good story, but the truth is so much more mundane. I hope the person who tattled didn't end up getting punished for it. I've been typing this up in an old typewriter I found in a neighbor's old house. Kinda scummy on my part, I know, but I didn't want to handwrite all of this. One day, when I pass away, I hope someone will find the information and let people know what happened here, how the alien crash occurred, the alien child who escaped into the outback, but more importantly, the deaths that took place here, how the army came in and covered up the aliens. Oh, and for those who are wondering, Blue came back home a month after most people left. He just wandered up to my front step, barked and sat down, with his tongue hanging out, like he never left. He has been my constant companion ever since. He came back with a grey blind eye, and what looked like to be a healed bullet wound in his shoulder. Other than a scar in his coat, he was perfectly okay, and hasn't aged a day since I got him back. I'm not looking a gift horse in the mouth, so I'm happy about this. The aliens don't frighten me. As for the alien, I hope it is never found. I hope you enjoy this story. What did you think of it? Let me know what you thought in the comments section down below. Don't forget to stab the like button, subscribe, hit the bell and leave a comment. This video is made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreon subscribers, and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Don't forget to check out my social media accounts below, including my merch. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.